Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our Econ 210 macroeconomics lectures. Today, I'm going to discuss the issue of unemployment with you, a key concept in macroeconomics, and we are going to look at the unemployment situation in our country and the distribution of employment as well in our country to give you an idea about the labor market in Turkey. And then we are going to discuss the types of unemployment, different types and definitions of unemployment. And we are going to discuss what might be the factors that might lead to changes in unemployment, particularly in the long term. All right, so this is going to be our chapter 33, but as you will see, I'm not going to go through the full chapter 33 topics because some of the issues in the book are not directly related to what we want to do. Those are issues related particularly to the US economy. So I'm going to skip those parts, and I'm going to concentrate on the key topics, the key concepts. All right, so first let's have a look at the measurements in the labor market. Now, in an economy, we would divide the population into people who are potentially available for employment, and those would be the people at working age of 15 and above, which are not institutionalized. I'm going to explain what institutionalized means. So the population will be divided between people at the working age and non-institutional civilian population, and the people who are not eligible for work or who are not available for work, and those would be people, children basically, below the working age of 15, who are institutionalized. By institutionalization, we mean people who are in prison, people who are in mental hospitals, and people who are in the army for mandatory service. Okay, so as you see here, actually I'm ruling out the army officers. Okay, so if you are in the army for mandatory service, then you are actually not eligible for work for a short period of time. If you are in the mental hospital, you are institutionalized and you are not eligible for work. And also, if you are in prison, you are institutionalized, you are not available for work. Otherwise, I mean, everybody above the age of 15 and who are not in these categories are making up the non-institutional civilian population. Now, among the non-institutional civilian population, we have people who are in the labor force and people who are not in the labor force. Now, if you are not in the labor force, it might be by choice, it might be by retirement, or it might be because you are still in school. Okay, so not being in the labor force, particularly for young people, means that you are still in school and you have not yet joined the labor force. There might be homemakers who choose not to work and look after their children, for example, at home, or you might be a retired person and therefore you are not in the labor force, or you might be disabled, you are not in the labor force. Okay, so those might be the reasons for why people would not be in the labor force. Otherwise, you are counted in the labor force. Who are in the labor force then? People who are gainfully employed and people who are unemployed. Now, what do we mean by gainfully employed? You currently have a job which pays you wages or which earns you some income. It might be a full-time job. It might be a full-time job, so you will be working 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, or you might be working part-time, or you might be even working for once a week. It doesn't matter. As long as you earn an income from your work, you are employed. It doesn't matter whether you are part-time, quarter-time, or full-time. On the other hand, who are unemployed? People who are unemployed are those who are still in the labor force and still actively looking for a job. So if you are out of work, but if you are still looking for a job currently, actively, then you are considered to be unemployed. But on the other hand, if you lose the hope of ever finding a job after a certain period of time, you become a discouraged worker, and then you fall out of the labor force. And actually, this is, sorry, for economies like ours, this actually poses an important problem because as you might imagine, people stay unemployed for long periods of time, but they still be looking for jobs, but the official statistics do not consider them to be unemployed. They fall out of the labor force according to the labor market statistics. Now in Turkey, that would be like a 4 weeks time. After you lose your job or after you leave your job, if you haven't found a job in 4 weeks, you become a discouraged worker. You fall out of the labor force, therefore you are not counted as unemployed. For economies like ours, that might pose a problem in terms of the exposition of these statistics. But nevertheless, that is the official exposition or official representation of this data. All right, so who makes up the labor force? Again, people who are currently actively employed and people who are not unemployed, people who are currently unemployed. All right, so what is the unemployment rate that we talk about all the time? Sorry about that. Unemployment rate is given by the ratio of the number of unemployed to the people in the labor force. So as you see, we go one step up, the number of unemployed divided by the labor force. It is not the number of the unemployed divided by the population, for example, right? It is just the number of unemployed people divided by the number of people in the labor force, which of course is much smaller than the actual population, as you might imagine. On the other hand, what is the labor force participation rate, which is also an important indicator of the labor market in a country? That is the number of the people in the labor force divided by the people eligible for work at the working age. In our case, that is represented by the non-institutional civilian population. So those are the two important rates that we look at in terms of the health of the economy and the labor market. All right, so here what we look at is the progression of the real GDP growth rate or our economic growth rate and the unemployment rate in Turkey. As you see, the rate of unemployment in Turkey is hovering around 10% for a very long time, but it has been on the rise since 2019. And currently it is about 13.5, 14%. Now the blue bars represent the real GDP growth rates, as you see. And also, as we will talk about by the end of the lecture today, the unemployment rate follows the real GDP growth rate actually inversely, as you might see. When we have low growth rates, as you see, for example, here in 2001, we had a major downturn in economic growth in Turkey. That was a crisis period. As you see, the unemployment rate shown by the red line has started rising, and actually it stayed high after that, even though we had some recovery in economic growth. On the other hand, as you see also in 2008, 2009, again, another crisis, but of course that was a US-based financial crisis, which of course spilled over to the rest of the world. As you see in 2009 also, with that sharp drop in economic growth rate, as you see -5 almost, -5%, you also see another hike in the unemployment rate. Also, as you see, after 2017, as the rate of economic growth started to slow down, the unemployment rate also started rising, and right now it is also continuing to increase over time. Here you see, since 2005, this division of the full population into labor force, employed, unemployed, people who are not in the labor force. As you see, the Turkish labor force participation rate for the whole economy for both males and females, it has changed from 45% to 49% today. Okay, so the Turkish labor force participation rate is 49%. So what does it mean? 49% of the people in the working age, 15 and above, and who are not institutionalized, are in the labor force, who are employed and unemployed. 49%, okay? So as you see, it is less than half of the non-institutional civilian population. Among those, right now, about 13.4% is unemployed. So the share of the number of people who are unemployed in the labor force is about 13-14% right now. Of course, by age and by gender, this will be different. Okay, this is the overall rate of unemployment. You also see, for example, here there is this information, non-agricultural unemployment rate is 16%. So unemployment rate in the sectors other than agriculture, services, construction, mining, industry, or manufacturing, that would be 16%. And also here you see the progression of the unemployment rate together with the labor force participation rate. Now, at times when there is a drop in the labor force participation rate, you might also expect an increase in the unemployment rate. As you see, because the number of people in the labor force will be declining, making the share of the number of unemployed in the total labor force larger. So at times you might see that is also the case according to, but over time, as you see, since 2005, to some degree, the labor force participation rate in Turkey has increased. Now here we look at the division of the population in Turkey into people who are not in the labor force and people who are in the labor force. As you see from here, 49% of people in the non-institutional civilian population is in the labor force. Okay, so the labor force participation rate in 2020, as you see, is 49%, the sum of the employed and the unemployed. So 51% of people at the working age and eligible for work are not in the labor force. When we look at the division between females and males, as you see, there's a huge difference between genders. 70% of females at the working age and who are eligible for work are not in the labor force. On the other hand, 30% of women, females, who are eligible for work at the working age are in the labor force. On the other hand, when you look at males, 60% are in the labor force, 40% are not, I'm sorry here, not in the labor force, 32% are not in the labor force, 68% are in the labor force, as you see. Okay, so for women, 70% not in the labor force. For men, 32% not in the labor force. And for women, 30% are in the labor force. For men, 68% are in the labor force. So for men, actually, this is, I mean, this might be still considered a little bit, low still. I mean, 32% of men are not in the labor force. That might be because, again, because of education or because of being retired. But still, I mean, 60% employed is quite low compared to world averages. But I mean, we are somewhere, for men, we are somewhere at the lower end of the world average, I would say. But for females, this is really anomaly in the world economy. I mean, even for North African countries, this is low. Okay, 70% of females of the working age not in the labor force is a quite an anomaly, I would say, because I mean, when you look at China, for example, females would have the same labor force participation as men, for example. Or when you look at European economies, they would be more or less similar. But as you see, what brings down the Turkish labor force participation, as you see here, only about 49% is actually females, because as you can imagine, half of the population is made up of women and 70% are not even in the labor force. So what brings down the Turkish labor force participation to 49%? I mean, in a healthy economy, you would have this as 65%, 70%. When you look at, for example, for former Soviet Union economies or China, those have 80% labor force participation rates. When you look at European countries, US, or other developed economies, those would be around 65 to 70%. So here, what brings the labor force participation rate in Turkey down is the behavior of females. So again, here you see, just to compare, so in total, about 30 million people are in the labor force. Out of them, about 26 million are employed. But for females, as you see, only about 10-11 million people are in the labor force. Most of the labor force is made up of men. All right, now apart from that, of course, these are related to labor force and unemployment. So as you see, for example, here, 26% of females are employed, 60% of males are employed. So where are they employed, we would ask? As you see, most of them are employed in the services. So when we look at the services, the sectoral employment division or sectoral employment combination in Turkey, you see that 56% of people who are employed in the services sectors. 6% in construction, 21% in industry, that includes manufacturing and mining, 17% in agriculture. Okay, so as you see, currently in Turkey, 56% of people, more than half of the employed people, are employed in the services sectors. That would be, you know, tourism, that would be education, that would be government services, that would be you know, restaurants, that would be, you know, retail, right? Anything that goes into transportation, right? Those are the services sectors. And as you see, that makes up for the largest proportion of employment in Turkey. Now, of course, this is the end outcome, right? This is 2020, the last year that we have data for. But if you look at how we have progressed to this number, as you see, to start with, back in the 1980s, the Turkish economy's employment was largely actually in agriculture. As you see, the blue line comes down from about 50% of total employment down to, in 2013, here we have, down to, as you see, about 20%. So actually, as you see, in the last 30 years or so, there has been a huge exit from agricultural employment. Where does it go? Into services. As you see, there hasn't been much of a change in manufacturing share, although it has increased to some extent, of course. You might, of course, expect it to increase as you get a little bit more industrialized, but it is not at the level that we wish it to be. And also, construction has followed a rather steady rate, you know, around 5-6%. So as you see, some of the people who exited agriculture have gone into manufacturing to some extent, but largely they have entered the services sector. As you see, there is a clear, you know, division in this sectoral employment between agriculture and services. Okay, so now I would say for a country of our, for an economy of our size and of our, you know, sectoral composition, I would say this is, again, when you look at countries same size, or economies similar size, this is kind of, again, an anomaly in the in the Turkish economy, right? Our services sector employment should not be this large for a country economy like ours, okay? So this is actually kind of interesting to talk about. You would expect the agricultural employment not to fall as sharp as you see here. What you see is in the 2000s, it falls sharply, and the services share rises sharply in return, okay? So, but I mean, you would first expect that people go into industry and then exit to services sector, but in Turkey, they have immediately gone to the services sector as they exited agricultural sector. Okay, so this tells you something about the, also sectoral composition of production in Turkey. So again, in the 2000s, the sectoral composition of employment has dramatically changed between a switch from right from agriculture into services. Also, when we look at the employed by employment status, you see that most of the workers are regular employees, meaning that they are waged workers or waged employees. Only 4% are employers. Only 17% are own account workers or entrepreneurs, you might say, or small business owners. And 9% are still unpaid family workers. What do we mean by unpaid family workers? Those are mostly women in agricultural sector. Okay, so 70%, a huge proportion, those would be, government workers, those will be waged workers, those would be, they are working for somebody else, basically. 4% employers, 17% on account workers or entrepreneurs or small business owners, and 9% unpaid family workers. Now, another diagram I would like to show you to give you an idea about the Turkish labor market is people who are not registered to Social Security institution, meaning the informal workers, people who are not registered to SGK, okay? Informal workers and formal istihdam. Okay, so as you see, in total, still in Turkey, 30% of workers are not registered to Social Security institution. And as you see, 83 of them are in agriculture, 19% of them are in non-agricultural sectors such as services and manufacturing and mining. Okay, so 30% unregistered workers is still a very large number. Now, in an economy that you would expect about 10 to 15% unregistered workers, but this is a major problem for the Turkish economy, because as you might imagine, these people do not pay income tax and they do not have any social security contributions, and they do not have any social security coverage for their retirement. Okay, so actually they are working quite under some degree of risk, because they are not covered for health insurance and they are not covered for retirement for later. Okay, so actually they are working with very low pay, I would say. But they still, as you see, appear in the statistics. because it's a major issue in the Turkish economy, right? We need to report that. On the other hand, as you see, about 36% of females who are employed are not registered to the Social Security institution, and as you see, 94.2% of them are in agriculture. So bulk of the non-registered workers in Turkey come from female workers in agriculture, as you see. So otherwise, I mean, 19.7% in females in non-agricultural sectors and 19% in non-agricultural sector males, they are more or less the same. But what is distinctive here is the share of female employed, the share of female employees in agriculture who are not registered to the Social Security institution. Okay, so this is a major issue in the Turkish labor market, and it remains to be an issue. Actually, back in 2006, they attempted to set certain rules and regulations to reduce the share of non-registered employees in the Turkish labor market. But of course, after some time, that was also left on its own, I would say. Okay, so nobody really pursued that particular program. All right, so I mean, as you see, 30% of the workers or total employment in Turkey is still not registered without any insurance and without any retirement coverage, of course. All right, so I mean, that I think probably has given you some idea about the structure of the Turkish unemployment, and the issue of informal employment in Turkey. Now, at this point, I would like to talk about the three main types of unemployment. Okay, what makes up the unemployment rate? Now, as you see in the official Turkish statistics, it is 13.4%. But of course, as I said, there might be differences in unemployment in different age groups. For example, I didn't put it here, but when you look at the young population between the ages of 15 and 24, the unemployment rate unfortunately goes up to about 26%. So you will see that for different age groups, the unemployment rate might be different, and also for different genders, as we have seen, the unemployment rate might be different. And also, I mean, when you consider different, education levels, different, employment status, you might have also different unemployment rates. Okay, so it depends on what you want to look at in the statistics, in the official statistics. But I mean, here, let's talk about the general idea of unemployment, right? What makes up the 13.4% unemployment rate in Turkey? So it will be made up of three main different unemployment types. The first one I would like to talk about is what we call frictional or surge unemployment. Now, what do we mean by frictional or surge unemployment? It is the unemployment associated with the changing of jobs in a dynamic economy. So it is a natural occurrence that we will see in a healthy dynamic economy. The frictional unemployment or surge unemployment would occur when workers leave their old jobs but haven't yet found new jobs. Okay, so in this case, you might think of this as voluntary unemployment, because workers will leave their old jobs voluntarily and will want to look for new jobs. And while they are looking for these new jobs, they will be frictionally unemployed. The workers will leave their jobs voluntarily, either because they need to relocate to another city, to another town, or they will want to look for a better job, or sometimes they will leave their jobs to get more education and then go back into employment, okay, find a better job, okay? So in this case, they might have saved enough in order to leave their jobs and hopefully find a better paying job or a job which better suits their skills. Now, frictional unemployment would occur when there's a mismatch between workers and jobs in terms of worker skills, payment, location, attitudes, tastes, and other heterogeneous reasons, heterogeneous factors or varied factors. Again, this type of unemployment will always be present even in the healthiest economies because it is voluntary unemployment. And also, this is a part of natural job search process. And you would say that the frictional unemployment is desirable or it is beneficial, it is good for the economy because it allows for a better allocation of resources because workers will be employed where they are most productive, where they are most happy, okay? But of course, if this process lasts too long, it might cause a problem over the long term. Now, theoretically speaking, the number of frictionally unemployed will be equal to the number of unfulfilled jobs or vacant jobs. Therefore, under frictional unemployment, the labor market will actually be in equilibrium. The number of employed will be equal to the number of fulfilled jobs. So we will have full employment. All right, now other than frictional unemployment, we have the structural unemployment type. Now, what do we mean by structural unemployment? It will result from the long-run decline of certain industries because of rising costs, because of changing consumer preferences or technological progress. It will occur when in an economy exists when shifts occur in an economy that creates a mismatch between the skills of the workers and the skills required by employers. Now, one example that I always give is the coal miners, for example. Right now, it has been, or I would say almost 30 years that we have switched to natural gas in Turkey, more than 30 years even. I was in Ankara in 1990s and we already had natural gas back then. So when we switched to a cleaner form of, or a more green form of energy away from coal burning, what will happen? Of course, some of the miners in coal mines will become unemployed because the economy now has switched to a different source of energy, a different source of electricity or heat. So when that happens, the coal miners will become structurally unemployed. And if they don't retrain themselves and if they don't retrain themselves to find new jobs, they will remain structurally unemployed, and that will be a long-term problem for the economy. Okay, so because the economy's preferences have changed and because consumers have switched to a cleaner form of energy like natural gas, and at the time, I think it was cheaper, but of course, right now it is not cheap at all, but nevertheless, we use natural gas rather than coal because it causes many other problems like, air pollution, which is, of course, long-term problem. So when that happened, of course, coal miners in Zonguldak, for example, became structurally unemployed. So they need to retrain themselves. They need to get, further training to find new jobs. Okay. Or for example, again, another example is the secretaries who use typewriters. And now probably you don't know what a typewriter is, but before the time of the computers, laptops, we used typewriters in order to write reports or documents, okay? And you had to be skilled in order to use the typewriter. It required a special skill. But of course, that skill has now become obsolete or outdated because now we use computers and printers in order to create documents. Okay, so if the secretary does not retrain himself or herself for these new technologies, for a very long time, he or she will be structurally unemployed, and that will pose a problem for the economy. Or they will be willing and able to accept a lower level, lower paying, unskilled job, and they might stay unemployed until the economy starts to recover again. Okay, so then again, structural unemployment is due to the fact that there is a structural change. There is a major, transformation in the economy due to, again, changes in preferences, changes in technology. Now, the sum of frictional unemployment we have just talked about and the structural unemployment make up what we call the natural unemployment. Okay, the sum of the frictional and structural unemployment types is called the natural unemployment. And remember, we talked about the potential output in an economy that the economy can produce in the long run with full employment. Remember, we talked about that in chapter 26, I think, right? So when the economy produces so the economy will produce its potential output when it has only natural unemployment. Okay, so the unemployment that corresponds to the economy's potential output or the natural output is the natural unemployment rate, and it is the sum of the frictional and structural unemployment types. Okay, that's it, right? So part of the unemployment that we have is frictional, structural, and plus cyclical. So what is cyclical unemployment? Different than structural and frictional unemployment types. Cyclical unemployment is the unemployment that is associated with the general downturns or the recessions or the falls in the economic growth rate in an economy. Now, cyclical unemployment is not part of natural unemployment, right? So the unemployment that we report, like 13.4 in Turkey, is natural unemployment, which is structural plus cyclical, structural plus frictional, plus the cyclical. Okay, so these three types of unemployment make up the reported unemployment that we have in a country. So cyclical unemployment is not part of natural unemployment. It happens in the contraction periods in an economy, in the contraction phase of the fluctuations in output. And those happen when demand for goods and services decline, which will force businesses to fire or lay off large numbers of workers to cut costs. Now, if cyclical unemployment lasts for too long, it will tend to create even more unemployment. Why? Because unemployed workers will cut demand. Therefore, aggregate demand in the economy will further decline, which will further lead to contraction of output, okay? And therefore, further unemployment. So if you enter into that particular vicious cycle, that will lead to further and further recession, further and further unemployment, okay? So it needs to be, stopped at some point. All right, so then we have three types of unemployment: frictional, structural, and cyclical unemployment types. So these three unemployments make up the economy's unemployment, which is in Turkey right now about 14%, 13.4%. And out of that, structural plus frictional make up the natural unemployment rate. Now, the rate of unemployment consistent with potential output, which is the natural unemployment rate, is about 4 or 5%, depending on the characteristics of an economy. Of course, I mean, it might be 3%, it might be 6%, but on average, when we look at the world countries, that might be 4 to 5%. And as we mentioned, because of the structural transformation of an economy and because of this frictional or surge unemployment, even in the healthiest economies, you will have this unemployment. Okay, so you cannot see an economy with zero unemployment rate because of these reasons. Of course, it might go down to very low levels, like sometimes we see in Japan, for example, right? But of course, that is also not very healthy, okay? You need to have some degree of unemployment in the economy for the, dynamism, I would say, for the, dynamism of the economy. Now, remember I showed you the relationship between the rate of growth in the GDP or the rate of economic growth in an economy and the unemployment rate. Actually, the relationship that we have talked about is captured in what we call the Okun's rule of thumb or Okun's law. Right, so the relationship between the changes in output and or the rate of growth in output and unemployment rate is represented by the Okun's law or the Okun's rule of thumb. Now, what does it look like? The rate of change in output, in real output, away from the potential is some multiple of the deviation in unemployment rate away from the natural rate. As you see here, y minus y star over y star is the percent deviation in output from the potential output. This omega is some estimated parameter, like 2, for example. And here, u minus u star is the deviation in the unemployment rate from the natural unemployment rate. So for example, here in this case, Okun's rule of thumb states that a 1 percentage point rise in the unemployment rate away from the natural rate, let's say the natural unemployment rate is 4%, and the actual unemployment rate in the economy is 5%, then as long as omega is equal to 2, this deviation or this discrepancy in the unemployment rate away from the natural rate will be associated with a 2% fall in output from its trend or from its potential, or vice versa. Okay, so you don't really know the causality here, but they are associated or they are linked to each other. And this omega, of course, can be different for different countries. For the US economy, it is estimated to be 2. All right, so looking at this relationship, we can assess, the direction of the changes in output away from the potential, or as you can see here, U minus U star gives you the cyclical unemployment in the economy, and therefore the Y minus Y star over Y star will give you the business cycle fluctuation in the output away from its trend or from its potential. All right, so cyclical unemployment in relation to the potential, in relation to the deviations in output away from the potential. So that is Okun's law. All right, now at this point, we can say that the unemployment rate would provide an indication of how much labor is available to the firms in order to increase production. Okay, so I mean, you can think of the unemployed as the, reserve army of workers, right? They are ready to work, they are willing to work. Actually, but of course, depending on the wages as well. If there is very high unemployment in the economy, then they might be willing to work for lower wages. But on the other hand, if the labor market is very tight, in the sense that the unemployment rate is already very low, right, the unemployed might be willing to wait longer times in order, or for higher wages in order to work. Okay, so the number of unemployed or the unemployment rate in the economy is an indication to the firms of how much they can further expand output. But of course, what makes estimating this relationship between the, as we have just seen, the economy's rate of growth and the deviations from the natural rate of unemployment is that increases in productivity and increases in the number of people choosing to work would fluctuate. Now, what do I mean by that? For example, in Turkey, for example, in 2010s particularly, we had these discussions in the last decade, I would say. We had the discussions on what we call jobless growth. That's to say, increases in productivity would lead to growth, right? The output would still continue growing without additional employment, without any improvement in unemployment. Okay, so then you will see that the link between unemployment and growth would cease to exist. Okay, so you will not be able to associate unemployment to output growth, because output would grow without increases in employment or without decreases in unemployment, because you have higher productivity for each worker you already have. Okay, so such matters would complicate the relationship, the straightforward relationship between unemployment and output growth. And as I have just mentioned, what we measure in Okun's law is cyclical unemployment. It is the unemployment away from the natural unemployment, right? That is the cyclical unemployment. But what cannot be resolved here is structural unemployment, long-term unemployment that occurs because of changes in the structure of the economy and cannot be resolved by short-term macro policies. And as we mentioned, it is more related to technological changes. And most of the short-term policy discussions, like monetary policy measures, fiscal policy measures, they relate to reducing cyclical unemployment, not structural unemployment, because again, structural unemployment is related to changing the transforming structure of the economy due to, for example, technological change, due to tastes of or preferences of customers, or changing cost conditions in the economy. They are not related at all to the demand side policy measures, which you might be using to get rid of the cyclical unemployment, at least in the short term. Remember, the demand side policies are good for short-term remedies. All right, now another thing I would like to discuss with you is the one important determinant of whether a person would accept a job or not. Now, one important factor whether a person accepts or takes a job or not is his or her reservation wage. Reservation wage, in a nutshell, is the wage that a person requires or accepts or demands before taking or accepting a job. Reservation wage depends on several factors, such as the person's skills, person's education level, person's age, person's experience level, etc. Okay, so reservation wage for each individual will be different. My reservation wage will be something. On the other hand, Bill Gates' reservation will be something else, or my reservation wage will be something. An unskilled worker's reservation wage will be something else. Okay. So depending on the person's age, skills, education level, experience, a person might not have gone to school for a very long time, but will have a lot of experience on the job. Okay, right? The foremen in factories, right? They are very knowledgeable for what they are doing, for example, right? They will be in high demand, therefore they will have a high reservation wage. Okay, so depending on these factors, each person's reservation wage will be different. Now, I always tell this example. Somewhere I read it was this top model. Now, we don't have these top models anymore, but in the 1980s, in the 1990s, we had a bunch of top models, like Naomi Campbell, Cindy Crawford, Linda Evangelista, so on and so forth, right? So one of them, probably either, Naomi Campbell or Linda Evangelista, one of them said, I will not get out of the bed for less than $10,000 a day. Okay, so you can tell that $10,000 a day is the reservation wage for that top model. Okay. So then, of course, I mean, this is something that a lot of people earn over a year, okay, nevertheless, but this person will not get out of the bed for less than $10,000 dollars. So it is the, the wage that I accept or decline a job. It's just that, indifference wage. Of course, the higher the reservation wage, the longer the worker will be willing to wait for a higher paying job in order to match his or her skills. And of course, the higher the reservation wage, therefore, the higher will be frictional and thus natural unemployment. So this is interesting, right? Then you can say that the higher people are educated, the higher people are skilled, they will be, willing to wait for a better paying job. They will be willing to stay unemployed for longer periods of time in order to find a job which is better matched to their skills and better matched to their payment schedule. So in that case, frictional unemployment becomes longer, or search unemployment becomes longer. And actually, this is the situation in the Nordic countries, in Norway, in Sweden, in Denmark, what have you. Okay, so Iceland, although they are smaller countries, you look at their economies and they have higher unemployment rates than the countries with similar, per capita income levels, like the US or other European economies. And you look for the reason why, and you see that actually the frictional unemployment rates are quite high in these Nordic economies, okay? I mean, people decide to stay unemployed until they find a better job matched to their skills, better job with higher pay, and they can do so, okay, because they have already saved to some extent. All right, so that's why the unemployment rate surprisingly is high in some of the Nordic economies because of the high frictional or search unemployment. All right, so then, that target, in the book, it calls it the target rate of unemployment, but it's actually the natural rate of unemployment. So why might it change, or how might it change or differ over time? So an economy does not have a preset or a constant natural unemployment rate. A natural unemployment rate, that's to say, even the natural unemployment rate in a single country can change over time, okay, depending on several factors such as demographics, right? As we mentioned, different age groups have different unemployment rates. For example, it might be the case that because younger people are highly educated compared to their parents, grandparents, they might wait longer times to find a suitable job for their skills. Okay, therefore, you might have higher frictional unemployment. An economy might be experiencing changing social and institutional structure. There might be changing in government institutions. There might be changes in labor market laws. In particular, for example, minimum wage laws. Okay? From time to time, you will see that the minimum wages are changing. And for an unskilled person, actually, unskilled worker, minimum wage, you can imagine, will be the reservation wage. Okay, so if the minimum wage rises, you might also think that the reservation wages are also rising, and that might be an indication of higher unemployment in the economy. Again, with respect to the structural changes, there might be technological changes through automation or through use of artificial intelligence in production. There might be, the country might be subject to globalization, and technological change might require structural change. So even though the economy is not experiencing structural change on its own, through globalization, through the force of globalization, the economy will be experiencing structural changes. Okay. Right. So if you are not up to par with this structural change and the skills needed to fulfill this structural change or technological change, you might have your reservation wages falling because you do not have the enough skills or the sufficient level of education to fulfill the job or to fulfill the needs of the job. Okay, so I mean, these are all different concerns. Of course, there might be other factors in the economy, but these are the most general factors that might lead to changes in the natural rate of unemployment, which is of course frictional plus structural unemployment types. All right, so this is all that we would like to cover for chapter 33. As I said, you are not going to be responsible for the full chapter. There are topics, there are parts that I did not go through in the chapter, particularly the last part was talking about some policy implementation in the US, which of course you are not going to be responsible from. So whatever is in the notes, whatever is in these lectures, you will be responsible, such as, right, we talked about the types of unemployment, the definition of unemployment, right, structural unemployment, frictional unemployment, cyclical unemployment, Okun's law, and also the factors that might lead to changes in the natural rate of unemployment. These are the topics you will be responsible from, particularly, of course, in the final exam. Okay. All right, so let me finish this part for today, and then I will be back with you in discussing the inflation in the other session. Okay, bye-bye for now.